You're tuned into WESU Middletown, 88.1 FM, all the way to the left of your dial. You're listening to Horizontal Power Hour, your source for anarchist thought, culture, and politics. Your hosts today are Zach Kierwood and Mariama Eversley.
On today's show, we will be talking to a transformative justice collective called Philly Stands Up, who work with those who have perpetrated sexual assault. Philly Stands Up seeks to challenge and find alternatives to the structural underpinnings behind sexual violence. Horizontal Power Hour is planned and produced by a collective called the Dream Committee. While we are continuously constructing our own process for making decisions and for creating our show, we have a basic model we work under. We focus our attention on the process of our own group, both with the goal of eliminating hierarchy and coercion internally, and with the conviction that ultimately our politics are not about a distant idyllic future, but about recreating the world around us right now. Each episode is hosted and produced by self-selected members of the collective on a rotating basis. For more information, email us at horizontalpowerhour@wesufm.org. I'd like to remind listeners that the views expressed on this show are our own, and in no way reflect the views and opinions of Wesleyan University or the WESU management. For that matter, what we present here doesn't even represent the Anarchist Radio Collective in its entirety.
Now we're going to talk to Jenna Peters-Golden, a collective member of Philly Stands Up. Welcome to the show, Jenna. What is the mission of Philly Stands Up?
Philly Stands Up is a transformative justice collective. Our goal is to hold people who perpetrate sexual assault accountable, to get justice for the survivor and the community, and to transform the behavior of the person who's caused harm without involving the cops or the court system at all.
And what is transformative justice?
Yeah. Transformative justice is a model of justice that believes that oppression is at the root of all violence or harm. So that means that our goal is not to punish people when they commit harm. Our goal is not to even restore relationships to the way they were before they caused harm, but to use a process to transform the perpetrator and the survivor and the community to get at the issues of oppression which were maybe underlying the act of violence, such as misogyny or racism or classism or ableism.
Okay. And how does Philly Stands Up differ from other sexual assault services?
For one thing, we're a volunteer collective. We're not a nonprofit. We don't have any hierarchy. We are a consensus-based radical volunteer collective. Also, we don't have any contact with the police or court systems. That's not our last resort for us. We just don't involve ourselves with those systems. Also, we believe the survivor, and we believe that people know what they need to change and heal. So we listen to the people who have survived harm or are going through harm, and we take our lead from them. So we don't push people around into thinking that we know best for them.
And how do you get those who have committed sexual assault to agree to work with Philly Stands Up?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends, and it's not always easy. Partly we try and show them that by working with us in a process, it's hopefully going to improve their life, right? Like they're going to be hopefully invited back into their community. They're going to learn a lot about themselves. They're going to have stronger and more authentic relationships. And hopefully we're getting them to a place where they understand that they don't want to commit harm and they want to be accountable. So we try and show them that by working with us, it's a really great and real way to get back involved in their community, because after someone commits sexual assault in a small community, often they experience a lot of alienation. They're not invited or welcomed into the spaces that they used to be. So usually we hope that that's enough of a reason to convince someone to work with us, and it's an alternative to going through the criminal legal system.
Do you rely on the community at all and going to health clinics or to get them to come to you?
Yeah, we definitely always rely on the community. We use resources in our community, such as health clinics, low-cost therapy and counseling, drug and alcohol prevention resources. We take really seriously STI testing. We utilize all those resources. And also, like, our community, like our housemates and our neighbors and people we do work with. Those are all people that we, when it's appropriate, include in the conversation about what we're trying to do, about how we're trying to create a safer space and community. So our community members are our neighbors and our friends and our comrades, and so they are often really involved.
And what does the process look like for working with someone who's committed sexual assault?
It always looks different depending on what the situation is, depending on who the person is. But in general, our accountability processes usually last somewhere between 9 and 18 months. And 2 Philly Stands Up collective members work with one person who's caused harm, so we're in a small group of 3. And basically what we're trying to do is we are trying to have the person who's caused harm recognize that they caused harm, which can take a long time. Then we're trying to get them to acknowledge that it had repercussions, that they actually hurt someone, even if they didn't have the intention of doing that. Then we're asking them to try and recognize the behaviors that they have, which led to the violence or the assault. And then we're asking them to unlearn those behaviors and try and learn different behaviors to replace the ones that led to violence or harm or patterns of abuse. And that's the general kind of path we take. And we use all kinds of teaching tools like long conversations and reading and writing and role-playing scenarios and challenging the perpetrator in all kinds of ways to get from point A to point B to point C. Mm-hmm. But it involves a lot of trust building and getting them to a place where they feel like they can trust us and listen to us in a real way, and we can listen to them.
How does your work affecting communities, and what does success look like, if I were to use the word success?
Well, I think it's affecting communities because, the reason we think that the work we're doing is really important is because sexual assault really tears apart radical communities, and we are all activists and revolutionaries and organizers in many different capacities with many different campaigns and projects. And so we think that what we're doing is we're creating a culture of sexual responsibility, of sexual health, of listening and respecting people. So, that can't be valued high enough. And having those kinds of cultures is what lets oftentimes other types of projects and organizing get off the ground and realize their goals and dreams. And, it's hard for us to kind of, we don't really have data or numbers on our success rate, except that we've been around for 7 years and have been working closely in our community for a really long time. And we have had situations that have really worked out where survivors feel comfortable and satisfied with the process, and the person who's caused harm has come to a place of accountability and changing their behavior and has even gone on to actively help out in other accountability processes or act as a role model for other members of their community.
Are you planning on transferring these skills to a wider community, or maybe pairing with other organizations?
Sure. I think that transformative justice, because it's so focused on small community, it's really dependent on who you know and what your culture looks like and what your neighborhood looks like. We sort of believe that this works best when you're doing it in your own community. So that feels pretty important, and, we encourage and imagine that the best way this could work is if every neighborhood, if every community, if every large organization had a transformative justice model for approaching interpersonal violence and sexual assault. So it works best when people are doing it in their small communities. With that being said, in Detroit at the U.S. Social Forum in 2010, Philly Stands Up was a part of launching a national network to confront sexual assault using transformative justice. And so we do have really strong relationships with other organizations and collectives that are doing this type of work all over the United States and Canada, and are trying to really stay involved with each other's work and build off of it and learn from it. So it's a combination of encouraging people to do this on a small scale, because we think that's what works best, and you always need to be aware of the state co-opting models that work really well in small communities. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, having really strong networks where we can support each other and learn from each other.
What are the origins of Philly Stands Up?
Philly Stands Up started about 7 years ago. In West Philadelphia, there was a music festival over a weekend, and a couple sexual assaults happened. And out of that, a group of survivors and friends of the survivors formed, and a group of mostly men formed who felt like they needed to be accountable to the assault, which was perpetrated by men, that happened at the festival. So after a couple months, these two groups decided that actually it was really important they stick around, because sexual assaults were happening a lot in punk and radical communities. And the group of survivors eventually transformed into a group called Philly's Pissed, which doesn't exist anymore, and now we are really happy to have a group in our neighborhood called the Philly Survivor Support Collective. And the group of men kind of transformed into Philly Stands Up. That was 7 years ago, and the groups look really different. They have many different genders and in them now. It's not a women's group or a men's group. And since then, we kind of learned as we went. So we only really got involved with the transformative justice theory about 3 years ago, so it's pretty new for us.
Have you faced any opposition from the state in any capacity, like police stepping in or some kind of state authority finding out about what you guys were doing?
Luckily, we haven't run into that in that way yet, partly because we operate on a sort of small, under-the-radar scale. We have had situations where other people go to the state after we're sort of involved and have had to navigate that, but we're really lucky to have some really amazing radical lawyers in our neighborhood who are in solidarity with us and have a lot of resources to be created around those. But the state involvement hasn't been a big problem for us yet, which is great.
Cool. Could you talk a little bit about what it is about the criminal justice system that is damaging to growth or healing when an individual has committed a sexual assault crime?
The criminal legal system in a big picture we see as being really founded in racism and founded in sexism and founded in homophobia and transphobia. So in general, we see it as a system which harms. It's a system that takes people out of their communities regardless of what they've done and puts them in jail. And we all know that there's then actual violence that takes place in prisons among correctional officers and among other people who are incarcerated. People leave the prison system unemployable, without resources, without places to go, sometimes on a sex offender list, meaning that they can't live in certain places. And we don't really see any of those things as equaling justice for the survivor. Also, it's important to know that the cycle of violence is really real, and so a really high percentage of people who are in prison for violent crimes are survivors themselves. A really large percentage of people who are on the sex offender list are survivors of childhood sexual assault. And so oftentimes the reason there's a lot of focus on oppression and violence at the root of an action of assault that's happened, we acknowledge that people who are perpetrating harm are coming from a lot of different stories and a lot of different places, and putting them in a system which just kind of creates violence is not one that's going to decrease violence in our communities.
Could you tell me about your Transformative Justice Action Camp?
Well, in January of 2011, on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, we were super proud to host a 3.5-day-long Transformative Justice Action Camp to confront sexual assault. And we were really humbled to have about 25 Action Camp participants who were organizers from all over the United States and Canada. We had participants from Brooklyn, from Indiana, from Tennessee, from North Carolina, from Seattle, from Montreal, from Toronto, from Oakland, from San Francisco, and even more. And all those folks have been doing anti-violence and sexual assault work with transformative justice models for a differing period of time. We had folks that were representing the Audre Lorde Safe Outside the System project, the founder of Creative Interventions, folks who are a part of Insight, The Revolution Starts at Home, for Crying Out Loud, all different types of organizations that we were really honored to have there and coming from a lot of different types of experience. And basically the camp focused on us sharing our skills and facing problems that we're facing, all of us separately right now, and we want to be facing together, because using transformative justice as a model to confront sexual assault is very new work in a lot of ways. And so we really were able to work through together some kinks and some problems and a lot of trouble that we found out we were all facing. So it was a really, really amazing weekend, and we all made really close friends, and our organizations and collectives, and as individuals, we got to know each other and build trust and admire each other a lot more. It was a really powerful, powerful weekend.
And how can transformative justice be applied to other issues plaguing communities, like drugs or theft, or maybe even education or anything else?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that transformative justice has a really applicable definition, and more of a definition, really, it has principles, which are about autonomy and are about liberation and about anti-oppression and about zooming out of an instance of harm and looking at the bigger picture. So in a situation with drugs, you have a lot of systems that are involved in that one instance of drug use. You maybe have institutional racism going on. You maybe have gentrification or youth violence going on, problems with family, and there might actually be sexual assault at the root of whoever is using drugs. So I think that the key is really getting the community involved in moments of harm and talking to the person who's instigating harm or is surviving the harm, and getting people together in really appropriate and responsible ways to work through creative solutions that don't involve the cops. And, we know that calling the cops and sending someone to jail is not going to decrease their relationship to drug addiction, right? It's probably going to enhance it. So being real about the systems that we're using and trusting each other, trusting our neighbors, and getting to know each other better to talk to people and intervene in creative ways. And I think that's what transformative justice is about, and you can apply that to any moment of harm.
And my last question is, could you tell me about the Theater of the Oppressed?
Theater of the Oppressed is a modality of radical and revolutionary theater that was originated by someone named Boal. And it's a way of participating in theater and acting out scenarios as a way of talking about oppression and experiences of harm or of losing power, and then embodying that and actually acting them out in really creative theater games and role-playing scenarios.
Actually, I have one more question, because I was reading your blog earlier and I saw a post about ending sexual assault on campus, which is pertinent to me and other people listening to the show, because we're on a college campus. So what's your involvement in confronting sexual assault on campus, and what strategies do you propose?
Well, actually, the first weekend in November in Ann Arbor, Michigan, before the NASCO Institute, we're going to be hosting an all-day intensive workshop about how folks who are on college campuses can challenge their school systems of dealing with sexual assault, which often are not fulfilling what they need to do. So we really support students in getting creative and talking to each other and not relying on their universities' institutions of punishment or lack of punishment. And we're going to be partnering with someone named Erin Burrows who works for SAFER, which is an organization that actually really tackles issues of sexual assault and violence on campuses specifically, and getting creative about how to start your own group on campus if that's appropriate, how to link up campuses that are doing this work all over the country, and how to use resources that SAFER as an organization has to offer about creative policies that address some of this stuff. So you can check out our blog or website to learn more about how to sign up for that in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
How can the listeners get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can visit our website at www.phillystands.up.org. And from there, you can have access to our blog and our email address, which is phillystandsup.safe@gmail. You can always get in touch with us if you have questions or need to talk about a specific situation of sexual assault that you're facing.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. Good luck. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
You're tuned into WESU Middletown, 88.1 FM, all the way to the left of your dial. You're listening to Horizontal Power Hour, your source for anarchist thought, culture, and politics.